The SCP Foundation contains anomalous objects, but this doesn't mean that all SCPs are aggressive monsters. In fact, the stories of some SCPs can even be called tragic. In this video, we explore the top 5 saddest SCPs. Number 5. SCP-2053 Object Class Safe. SCP-2053-1 is a cube puzzle which appears identical to a standard Rubik's Cube. The puzzle can be solved in the same way that a non-anomalous cube can be solved, and the object shows signs of wear and tear, presumably an indication of heavy use. However, occasionally, SCP-2053-1 will enter an active state and its faces will begin to rotate on their own accord. And after several rotations, it will enter a passive state for 20 seconds. The object will then become active again and return to its solved state, where it will become dormant once more. SCP-2053-2 is a computer file labeled "I love you, Jake. Please read this .pdf." The file appears to be 1.2 megabytes in size. However, the number of pages contained within the document far surpasses the number that should be possible. However, the thing that connects SCP-2053-1 and this file is the fact that each page of the document depicts a two-dimensional polyhedral net equivalent to a three-dimensional Rubik's Cube, and below each diagram is an English phrase or sentence. This implies that for every possible permutation of the cube, there is a corresponding phrase, and that by rotating the faces of the cube to match the pages, one can communicate with 2053. Of course, an interview was conducted right away, and 2053-1 began by asking if it is speaking to Jake. The researcher responded with yes, and right after, 2053-1 said that it is Jake's dad. The cube continued, stating that it has never spoken to its son before, and said that it is so happy it found a way to communicate. And when asked to elaborate, 2053-1 said that the doctors claimed that Jake would never be able to talk again after the accident with his mom. The SCP then apologized and said that it loves its son, and after this message, the researcher became disturbed and ended the experiment. And in another test, the doctor decided not to lie about his identity and asked 2053 about his origin. However, the puzzle requested to talk to Jake, and when it was denied, it displayed the message, "Where is my son?" And ever since, 2053-1 cannot be rotated. So as we see, Jake lost the ability to speak as a result of an accident, and his father somehow became a puzzle because he wanted to talk to him once again. As such, out of all SCPs, the story of 2053 is definitely one of the most heartbreaking. Number 4. SCP-451 Object Class Euclid. SCP-451 is a Caucasian male that used to be a Foundation field agent. However, one day he was sent on a mission to retrieve a very dangerous artifact, and he never returned. As such, he was reported missing in action, but one day he reappeared at Site 19. However, it quickly became apparent that whatever he experienced, it transformed him in such a way so that he cannot perceive the presence or the actions of all human beings. As such, he was classified as SCP-451. Also, changes made to the environment by other humans are sometimes noted and sometimes not. And finally, when the agent does notice something, he often misinterprets its meaning. For example, when people try to communicate. As for the artifact he was supposed to recover, it remained at large. Of course, as you can imagine, not being able to perceive the people around you would make you go crazy, and this is exactly what happened, because in SCP-451's journal, which was somehow recovered, the agent states that from his point of view, all the people in the world disappeared as soon as he touched the artifact. And when he visited Site 19, he noticed that despite the lack of people, the cafeteria was still active, and after wandering around for more than a month and sneaking in into the offices of his colleagues, he began to feel like he's being followed. Another month went by, and he decided to end his own life. So he entered SCP-173's chamber and closed his eyes, but the statue didn't attack him. As such, he got his hands on a gun and tried to take his own life, but he survived, and instead, he terminated someone else by accident. Also, 451 noticed that all the documents in the facility kept moving and changing in front of him, leading him to believe that he is constantly traveling between alternate realities. And finally, 451's journal runs out of space, and the agent swears to find the alternate reality where he thinks he disappeared. So as we see, the story of SCP-451 is quite sad, because being trapped in a world seemingly all alone and unable to end your own misery certainly sounds very tragic. Number 3. SCP-1192, Object Class Euclid. SCP-1192 appears to be a juvenile male cockatoo approximately 1 foot in height. However, 1192's appearance is deceiving because the animal is actually sapient and exhibits intelligence and common knowledge consistent with that of a human child between the ages of 6 and 8. Furthermore, SCP-1192 doesn't behave as an ordinary bird of its species would because it's unable to preen itself and has difficulty flying despite being healthy. The bird was discovered and brought into containment by an agent, who at the time was embedded as an undercover agent. SCP-1192 began following the agent, trying to attract his attention because of his police uniform. The agent became suspicious due to SCP-1192's unusual species and erratic behavior, and a containment team was dispatched. After it was contained, 1192 was tested. However, the animal immediately gravitated to a pencil and paper and began to attempt to write crude sentences. The first thing 1192 wrote was, "Who are you?" And when the parrot was told it was in a hospital, it revealed that it's called Timmy. When asked if it knows what happened, SCP-1192 said that it has no idea and wrote, "I wanna go home." The bird even wrote down its former address, which led to a residential home in Montana. Of course, undercover agents were sent to the residence, and they determined that the house is inhabited by a man, a woman, and their son Timothy, age 7. However, apart from the fact that the child's name and age coincided with that of SCP-1192, nothing out of the ordinary was observed. As a result, 1192 remains in containment, and the bird is allowed a wide range of toys, but Timmy shows little interest in such activities. Instead, the bird writes and makes drawings. For example, Timmy often practices his writing, draws race cars, and writes sentences such as, "Why am I a bird?" Also, on one occasion, SCP-1192 drew a small child holding the hands of 2 adults, but the child was scratched out and the paper was ripped. The sentence, "I want my mom," was written on the backside. So, as we see, SCP-1192's origin remains totally unknown. One thing is certain, however, Timmy's life story is definitely heartbreaking. Number 2. SCP-1230, Object Class Safe. SCP-1230 is a green book that displays the phrase "A hero is born" on the first page, while all others appear to be blank. But despite of this unusual appearance, SCP-1230 doesn't seem anomalous at first. However, upon falling asleep, all readers will enter a lucid dream, where they are the protagonist of a troubled land. The exact description of this world varies, and seems to depend on the imagination of the reader, but in general, it appears to be a fantasy world full of adventures. And in the mind of the reader, these dreams will last anywhere from 45 seconds to over 200 years, but in reality, the reader will sleep the usual 8 hours, and after waking up, the reader will remember every aspect of the dream. Also, so far, in all dreams induced by SCP-1230, there is a character called the Bookkeeper, appearing as an old man in a green cloak who claims to be 1230 himself. This entity, also called SCP-1230-1, is very friendly and helpful. Also, it has stated that it enjoys creating these worlds, and it expresses sorrow when the dream comes to an end. But if SCP-1230 is a bug which gives you a good dream, then what makes it so sad? Well, just imagine that you live in a perfect fantasy land for over 200 years, where you fulfill all your desires, only to wake up and realize that it was just a dream. This is exactly what happened to a level 4 researcher who had a very long dream, because right after he woke up, this scientist took his own life. This left the bookkeeper heartbroken, realizing that despite of his intentions, he was responsible for the researcher's demise. And right after, all of SCP-1230's pages became soaking wet with the same message on every page. I'm so sorry. I never intended for this to happen. I just wanted to make people happy. However, another scientist requested to visit SCP-1230 with the intent to learn what happened. He found the bookkeeper sitting in a puddle, sobbing profusely, and 1230-1 explained that the researcher had grown too attached to this world, and upon waking up, he was disappointed with reality, and having learned the full story, the researcher awoke from the dream. But in the end, he decided to slip a note inside the book, and soon afterwards, SCP-1230 returned to its usual message, and when asked about the note, he said that it was just some friendly advice. So as we see, in the end, the bookkeeper overcame his sorrow. But nonetheless, the story of the first scientist is quite sad, and this definitely makes 1230 one of the most tragic SCPs. Number 1. SCP-1762 Old Object Class Safe. 1762 was a cardboard box that had the words "Here be dragons" written on it. It was usually empty. However, 1762 opened from time to time and instances of SCP-1762 exited. These instances resembled various types of dragons but appeared as origami models. After exiting the box, the paper dragons flied together and interacted playfully with any nearby personnel. And after some time, all instances flight back into 1762. However, the most important thing about this anomaly weren't the cute dragons themselves, but rather their backstory, which was revealed through the notes they left. In these notes, the dragons said that the box was a mere shadow of what their world once was. 1762 was originally a room that was created by a family that could change reality at will. But this wasn't an ordinary room. It was a portal to an alternate reality full of magical creatures such as dragons. And these magical people were not only the dragons' creators, they were also their friends. However, at some point, they couldn't maintain the room anymore and the place began to shrink, eventually turning into a cardboard box. Because of this weakened state, the dragons appeared as origami models, but this wasn't the worst part. The biggest problem was that without magical aid, the dragons were losing a war against other creatures and their world, and often asked for help. Despite of this, the Foundation ignored them and did nothing. In the end, the dragons left the location that connected them to our world, and left their last message: "We are sad. We love you. We will not forget you. We are scared. Will you forget us?" Shortly afterward, the text on the box changed from "Here be dragons" to "Here were dragons." And after years of inactivity, the box opened, revealing a crystal with the words "One last time" and a book that described the species that once lived inside. Shortly afterward, the box disintegrated. As we said earlier, the story of SCP-1762 is very sad because 1762 didn't contain aggressive dragons that wanted to eliminate us, but instead housed magical and friendly ones. But despite of this, we can understand the SCP Foundation's decision not to help them. The agency's goal is not to help preserve magical creatures, but instead to protect us from all anomalies that can be considered dangerous, and unfortunately, this includes dragons. In the end, we can be happy that this beautiful world once existed, and if the family ever creates another one, let's just hope it doesn't end up getting neutralized as well. If you enjoyed this video, then go watch our top 5 useful SCPs video, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos.